Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Welcome to another one of the monthly QuakeCoRE research seminars. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Nirmal Nair. Some of you will know Nirmal from his participation in QuakeCoRE to date, and he really embodies what it means for QuakeCoRE to be an interdisciplinary research centre. So his background is as a power engineer in the electrical engineering department, electrical and computer and software engineering department at the University of Auckland. He's been there for about 15 years, having previously been in the US and India as well. And so while his background is particularly in the power engineering sector, he's been working with respect to the resilience of power infrastructure over about the last 5 or so years, and it's made some significant contributions in the Resilience to Nature's Challenge project and also through QuakeCoRE. And so we're going to hear a little bit about that today. And so just a reminder, if you're listening in on the call, it'd be great for you to mute your microphones, and at the end, after Nirmal's presentation, there'll be a chance for him to field any questions. So Nirmal, I'll hand it over to you and look forward to hearing the talk.
Thanks, Brendan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay, sure. Cheers. Good day, everyone. Currently, I'm beaming from Charlotte in the US, where I'm here on a sabbatical, but thanks, Brendan, for that quite generous introduction. So I'll just get started, but before I do that, I know the audience here is pretty broad, primarily from civil engineering. So just to kind of indicate, I got into this resilience and the QuakeCoRE kind of research area in 2017, early through RNC. So you would definitely see some of the acknowledgements which I have. So in today's presentation, I would like to kind of update you on the last couple of years of work which we did with the spatially distributed infrastructure, a particular project. And so you can see all the acknowledgements here. And this project, which I'll be just describing in the second half of my presentation today, has been co-created with Westpar on the West Coast, and we will be sharing some of the work which we have been doing with Orion in Christchurch, and also with Chorus, which is the telecommunication network operator. So the funding has been primarily through the RNC, but we have had some support from QuakeCoRE as well. So just to get started, I just thought I'll tease the idea mostly around energy first, and just talk a little bit about, I might use interchangeably electricity and energy. You will see the reason shortly why it is the case. Now, this particular electricity infrastructure, which we shall call it as Grid 1.0, has been in operation since about 1882. So that's when grid electricity was done. So it's about 139 years old, and it's primarily based on carbon, and the benchmarks for its quality of supply and things like that has been kind of encapsulated in what is called as the trilemma, which is the energy security, energy sustainability, and energy affordability. So benchmarks have been done. These are global benchmarks because electricity as a product is everywhere in almost 194 countries. So if you can look at it, where is New Zealand placed? We are pretty well placed at number 10. And so this kind of gives you a balance about what the energy security is, energy affordability is, and sustainability is. So I would like to call it as Grid 1.0. What's changed? Well, the change is basically associated with the Zero Carbon Act from the New Zealand sense. So as you can see, many of you might have followed through the legislation. So we will be enacting this rule by the November of this year. So, so this triangle here is kind of now encapsulating into what is called as this triangle now, which is basically a decarbonization agenda. But also we are going to move from mostly a centralized system here to much more of a decentralized system with local local affordable energy resources like solar plants and batteries and things like that. So with that, there is a need for connecting this to the rest of the existing grid 1.0. So that's where the digitization comes. And this concept of distributed small-scale energy resources spread across is called as a decentralization. Now, consciously, I cut that here and kind of put democratization in the context of what we are which I experienced through the QuakeCoRE audience primarily. We have a whole bunch of researchers which is spanning from the social science as well. And as we move ahead, we might have to bring those social dynamics much more into the mix, which does affect the way energy system is going to be done. So that's why I just cut that and told it's democratization basically. So there would be new forms of engagements with this grid system. So what is grid 1.0 for New Zealand? Most of you might have had the single line diagram. We call it as generation, transmission, distribution, and you can see our portfolio. Our portfolio is primarily about 80% or so renewable with a hydro dominated system. And we have geothermal here, which is a sizable chunk. And we have wind growing, and we still have presence of the carbon one, which is about 16% or so. So that's the generation side. On the transmission side, we have the network is operated by an entity called as Transpower, so we have been operating the system close to since the 1890 or so. So we are also about 120 years old grid, as you can see it here. And the other piece which is focused much on this presentation is the distribution network, which is much more the local one. And in today's presentation, I'll be focusing mostly on the West Coast here. The utility here, or the distribution utility here, is Westpar. So you'll see some case studies on resilience, which we have been working with them with Westpar. So when we describe renewable energy resources, what are we really talking about? We do tend to classify hydro as renewable generation sources, primarily because of, but in some countries, because of externalities, they might not count that. But from our viewpoint, we are 60%, so we already have a system here. So that's hydro systems, solar, wind, geothermal. So these are renewable energy sources, which describes the way of how we live today. Now, this growth is not uniform. So as the world is moving towards Grid 2.0, there are some projections. So this is just a global picture of what I wanted to show here. As you can see, the projections are, there's a high growth of all these technologies, which I mentioned over here. And it is tracking pretty very highly as of now. So this is dated. This is since 2015, but we are really accelerating to form the IPCC's target to reach, to limit our temperature rise by 1.5 degrees by 2050. So for some countries, it's good for us to compare countries which are almost like close to 100% zero carbon network. So the three examples which I have posted here is Norway, Iceland, and France. So if you look at Norway, you can see 95% of its electricity system is primarily hydro. It is just kind of about 2% of fossil fuels. If you look at Iceland, which is almost close to 100%, which is hydro and geothermal. I also put the picture of France because certain countries would be following this template, which is the nuclear template. So you can see, nuclear fission accounts for almost like 76% or something like that. So different countries are going to follow different journey. Also, in most of these cases, energy efficiency is a key part of the picture, which people say it's important. And in renewable-rich countries like Norway and Iceland, there are not formal energy efficiency policies. But in New Zealand, we have, as a country, decided to have what is called as Energy Efficiency and Conservation Agency. So in all your electricity bill, some portion of it actually goes to supporting this ECA. So we, even though we have been mostly renewable, but we have made effect on to look at energy efficiency as well. So that's basically the energy picture. Transition to low carbon networks is not going to be a painless kind of a transition. Some estimates are that there will be some job lost in the carbon sector, which is about 27 million in the world. But however, as you can see, we might have to transition that. The job created is around 52 million or something like that. These are strong estimates which we are talking about. But this is the world which we are going to go in Grid 2.0, not only in New Zealand, but globally. So I'll quickly segue here to this reliance on natural resources, which is the focus of the Resilience Nature Challenge and QuakeCoRE. We're interested in natural hazards as well. So, you know, extreme weather does affect the energy supply, as you can see over here, the wind and issues like earthquakes and things like that. So that's definitely going to affect the nature of our energy system. So this is well known. As we go more into reliance onto these natural resources, which are low carbon, we are going to experience certain dynamics which does affect the energy system. Lightning, for instance, the frequency of lightning, you know, solar eclipse, you know, floods, and hurricanes and typhoons and things like that. So what is the frequency of these? Has that changed over the years? So the US did a big exercise. Some of you might have seen this for those of you who have been part of the Resilience Challenge. So this has been tracked from about so you can see over here from 1930 onwards. So this picture describes the natural vagaries. So as you can see, the geophysical disaster like earthquakes and things like that have been pretty much constant within the US system. So this picture is a picture of the US disasters. But climate-related hydrometeorological disaster has been seen to be rising. And the economic damage has also seen to be rising here. So that's the context of the hazard landscape. So the question to ask is how we have been operating the energy system 1.0 right now. Is it really a good metric to go? From viewpoint of electricity networks, we have well-defined reliability index matrices. But during hazards, we kind of put that into a small bucket here, which is called as high impact, low probability. But if you look at this picture, which is exponential in nature, we can't kind of but guess that, is this really low probability now? Or is this really increasing probability now? So which is the context in which I would like to pitch next. So we are moving in the energy system towards more a resilience-based system, because we are moving more and more towards renewable resources. So the weather impact does affect us, and also from the network aspect, we might have to look at how it affects the network. So one of the curves which we have been using since the last couple of years, some of you might have seen, is what is called as the energy resilience curve. So a disturbance happens, and there is an event which progresses. So therefore, there would be a disruption of service, and then it does restore back after a certain time, and then there is a post-restoration state as well. Now, the best way to describe this particular phenomenon in the context of resilience is the recently, a few years back, just before we started this work, was the Australian 2016 blackout. So what happened just before the event? So just before the event, so we're really talking about South Australia here. The whole state blacked out. And just before the event, it was being operated by wind generation, which is close to 50% of the generation plant. Things were fine till the event really struck. So the event which we are really now talking about is a major storm, multiple lightning strike, tornadoes, 22 damaged transmission pylons, 3 interconnectors damaged. most of the wind farms have a particular technology to just cut off when there is a huge disturbance. So that operated, and that cut off about 456 megawatts. So almost all the wind farm generation just disconnected. What did that do? Well, that the automatic system tried to get some help from the neighboring network. It was unsuccessful. It was dragging the rest of the local system down. It just got cut and the whole system collapsed. The whole of South Australia blacked out. A big investigation was done through this. I won't bore you with the technical details of this, but what I wanted to show you here was one of the consideration was Australia was relying on hydro-based renewables for these particular situations when wind was not there, and that just did not operate. So they wanted to investigate role of non-hydro-based renewables. So which is kind of a lesson for us as well in New Zealand, because we rely about 60–65% on hydro. One of the technology options which Australia went to was actually putting a big Tesla battery. We don't know whether it would work or not, but at least it was a very expensive proposition. But these are some new technologies which are being kind of looked at in Australia, and I'm pretty sure it would be looked at in the rest of the world as well. So capturing all this together, how do we go ahead for a Grid 2.0 operation? So what we see is as we move towards this kind of a phenomenon just for the electricity network, we would have to bring in other infrastructure like communication and data into it, primarily because if you look at this particular one, transportation here is totally decoupled directly from the electrical system as of now, because we still are dependent on fossil fuels. But if this link actually links with electricity system, then actually the transportation system would be tightly coupled with the electricity system, for instance. Similarly, communication is a big issue as well. So there are a lot of technology options which are coming in communication. So we feel that energy, communication, and data would be the new paradigm in which we can look at Grid 2.0 operations. So I'll now quickly segue into a project which we did through Resilience to Nature challenges for the last couple of years. I will quickly skim through this particular presentation because a detailed presentation of this is going to be presented this coming Monday. So for those of you who are interested, this is just a plug for you to kind of look into it. I'll pass on the details of that shortly towards the end of this presentation. So this was a 2-year project which we kind of focused entirely around the West Coast here. And so these were the timelines of it. We worked closely with Westpower and Chorus on this particular project. So some of you who had come on to QuakeCoRE, you might have seen this QuakeCoRE 2 in Nelson, this particular poster. So this project has ended as of now. The funding has ended from RNC 1. And so in the next few slides, I'll just talk about some of the highlights of this. But since this was co-created closely with the industry, we have been constantly socializing it with the industry. So I'll share some highlights of this industry engagement and the results sharing with them. So, so we started with some basics. Grid 1.0 is working on reliability-centric metrics, normal, restorative, alert, instant streams, and emergency. We proposed a new method based on the resilience. So once again, some of you might have seen this in some of our earlier presentations. This is pretty much the same thing as you can see, which I showed you in the previous slide. But now we added a couple of other items like short-term resilience and long-term resilience just to factor the earthquake or the seismic aspect around it. Because during a seismic shake, maybe we would look at short-term resilience initially. But if there has been a damage of the cable infrastructure or something like that, then we would look at long-term resilience. So we kind of adapted this picture to reflect which can be made seismic friendly, for instance. We kind of correlated very closely with the CDM criteria for resilience. There are quite a few R's: reduction, readiness, response, recovery. We try to map it for viewpoint of the electricity networks here. After having done that, we kind of socialized with the Lifeline groups. So this is a typical interdependency diagram for Lifelines. For those of you who have been working on this stuff, you might have been aware of this spreadsheet. So if you look at, apologize for the faint, for the not so clear one, but if you look at the electricity line here, in this column here, the priority of electricity is either 1 or 2. This is high priority for almost all the other systems. So obviously this is a key lifeline infrastructure which has to recover very, very fast. But factoring the short-term aspect and the long-term aspect, we thought we will decide system resilience as the short-term one and the asset resilience as much more longer-term one. So in this presentation, you will see both how we have approached system resilience in the last couple of years for the West Coast. This project is not done by mine, but a group of engineers, mostly power engineers. So we kind of divided this project into 2 different parts, the system resilience part, as you can see over here, with about 3 PhD students and 1 master's student, Farouk. And on the asset resilience side, we focused primarily with Orion Network, and Ibad has been working on that, focused mostly on the Canterbury earthquake sequence and looking at what its long-term damage has been and how you can factor that. So I'll quickly run initially through these 3 parts very, very quickly because of shortage of time. But as I mentioned, we will be describing this at length during one of our Zoom calls this coming Monday. From 2 weeks from now. So the first thing which we did was usually electrical engineers usually only worry about single line diagrams for their models. But to do resilience study, we had to combine it with the geolocation of its asset and then try to get what is called as a GeoElectric Map. So this was one step which we socialized with the industry. They are happy with proceeding this way. And then we had to map that with certain earthquake scenarios. So in our particular case, we were looking at the West Coast. So at that same time, Alpine Earth Fault AF8 was happening. So we chose that as our case study. So we worked closely with Brendan's group and the AF8 groups to look at what the simulation was done, mapped onto the geoelectrical map, and then try to get the hazard scenario for the assets. So, this is the geoelectric map. So this is the Alpine Earth Fault trajectory, potential trajectory. So this particular one is the whole of the West Coast distribution network, as you can see. So usually electrical guys usually look at this and they do all their analysis for security and reliability analysis. But for resilience, we mapped it into the geospatial coordinates of this part to look at the length and all the topography informations which we got it from GIS and closely working with the WESPAR center. So we were given a scenario of about 20 scenarios. We tried to choose 4 of them, the central hypocenter, north hypocenter, southern hypocenter, and empirical hypocenter. Each had about 5 case studies, so totally about 20 case studies, 20 trajectories. We passed on to WESPAR, and some of you might know all these terms, the component fragility function, the MMI, and things like that. And so passing on to WESPAR, we chose MMI 8 as a potential scenario for one particular trajectory. And when we did that, we estimated that this part of the network would be islanded, for instance. Proceeding further on to that, we now have the capability to do some restoration model from the moment the outage starts, which is depending upon mostly on the transport network, the re-energization crew, and things like that. And coming back into the system, can you really operate this network independently was a new innovation which we have proposed, which is called as islanding, so that this can stay together for about as long as you have resources, local resources here. This was really tested during, incidentally during FEHI in 2018. And this part of the network stayed connected for about 48 hours. So it is possible, if fuel resources are there, that we could extend this idea to a couple of months, for instance, or a few weeks. One of the aspects which we realized quickly is if you have to go through this part, communication would be a key part of that infrastructure. And I won't bore with most of the details. So we have done detailed studies with the electricity utility there. And we feel that communication-based network would really help this process to get much more robust in the future. So putting all that together, we get this picture, which is the poster, which many of you might have seen, which our researchers were kind of socializing a month back during QuakeCoRE. I'll quickly touch on communications just to show what it is. So we followed on a similar exercise with communications. So once again, we put communication as the key hub, what it is required, and how it interconnection with the rest of the networks is. A quick background onto the communication infrastructure. We looked at all the exchanges and the national exchanges and the local exchanges across the whole country. And we tried to define based on services and the interconnectivity. In this particular work, we just looked at the network. We have not really looked at the services as of now. We have kind of formulated a method now for the communication infrastructure now to form a systematic way of how engineers can do. And once again, it follows on similar lines like the power networks. We have kind of studied some fragility curve of communication facilities much more broadly. These are rough estimates at this stage, but at least to get a first take on it, we have been successful. We have looked at very closely, granularly towards all the center office failures and things like that. We have looked at the backup power as well, the weak coupling for running this communication network during the disturbance itself. There's still some more work to be done. The outcome of this has come out pretty well. We have socialized it with Chorus. They are happy with it. We have kind of socialized it also with the MBIE. And so this is a work in progress. Lastly, but not the least, I'll quickly come to the cable network. The seismic events which we considered was the Darfield and the Christchurch earthquakes. For the earthquake engineers there, I wouldn't have to talk much about the details of this history, but we focus mostly on the assets themselves, which was Orion's network. And some of these impacts like liquefaction, lateral spreading, ground deformation, tectonic uplift, all had some major impact on the underground assets of the network. We are continuing to work with Orion Cable. Our focus has only been on the 11 kV underground network for the whole of the city of Christchurch at this stage. And just to give some broad part of where we have achieved in the last 1.5 years or so, we have been successful in digitizing the 11 kV across a geospatial map. We are slowly starting to work on the fragility curve at this stage. And also, we are trying to get some intelligence around which assets needs strengthening. So this is some early indicators around asset resilience. There's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of interest from other utilities to carry this work in their network. So what have we achieved in the science stretches? Well, in the science stretches, we have achieved two things from a PhD viewpoint. Historically, conventional power system network is following this method like this: generation, black start, transmission, reconfiguration, and load resource. For the very first time in the West Coast, we tried to do some microgrid kind of recovery process. Also, we tried to look at the challenges of what is called as grid islanding. How can the other generators stay connected? We have been looking at this in context of the laboratory and actual physical devices in the laboratory here. These are emulations, real-time emulations. So all our simulations, everything seems to work. And Orion is now Westpower is now taking this system to do some real-time tests, or actually test this network during some future events which might happen. I would also like to put a plug on some theoretical work which is done by Leo on trying to combine seismic resilience across the whole country. So we are now getting theoretical aspects associated with this, and we are interested in some of the commercial outcomes of this as well. This has generated a lot of papers. I've just shown some of these things part here. Some of them are much practical, associated with the industry itself, and others are the high peer-reviewed publications have just started happening. We are kind of socializing it much more wider. The two reports we just now are in the peer review stage of it. We just completed it in the month of August, so it's being peer reviewed. So we are distributing this as two separate reports, just because one is with the electricity people, the other is with the communication guys, chorus. So there are some commercial issues which both have to sort out. And so therefore, we are just completed it right now. Peer review is happening. By the end of this year, we would be able to satisfy all the requirements and perhaps request both Vespar and Chorus to have a public copy made available. So we hope to make it available both through QuakeCoRE and as well as the RNC. So we had a lot of fun. We hosted a lot of conferences across the time. So these are some pictures across the whole conference part of it. We got some good recognition by Best Paper Awards by Safa here, Samad here, and Duncan. So we have been socializing it both to the industry forum and the academic forums all across. So what have we learned? So some open research and applied questions from RNC1. We are now interested in looking at multi-hazard sequential events, just like Bay of Plenty, both cyclone and floods, or Italy or Boston. So how do you really do it? And also going ahead, we are moving in the RNC2, Resilience to Nature Challenges 2, to Wellington case studies, where we would try to look at energy, communication, and data together. And in the QuakeCoRE, we are trying to look at QuakeCoRE 2, how we can formulate some new research themes. We feel that we are trying to develop harnessing disruptive technologies as one of the potential ones. There will be open discussions around this this coming Tuesday. So for those of you interested, please join us in that part. So this is a busy slide, but we are just kind of capturing what is that we need to do. So we have some projects up to 2028, which we have identified. From the high resolution side, from the University of Auckland side, seismic resilience method for the future. We are looking at West Coast communication resilience again, continuing with Chorus, Vespar, and Orion. We are trying to build some two new projects with RNC2. We have got the funding for it, but now we are trying to co-locate it with or co-create it with MBIE and Chorus. And for the electricity system with not only distribution, but generation and transmission together. And for the QuakeCoRE, as I mentioned, we are really looking at two particular parts in which I'm involved: the Resilience New Zealand transport system and harnessing of disruptive technologies. Most of the QuakeCoRE guys might be involved in this part. So this is a plug for two of those meetings. So if you could just note down, this recording will be posted, but just in case it's not timely enough, please note this number. The meeting ID is 304-347-494, and it is scheduled for 8th of October. It's between 10 to 11:30. And I'll post this PDF slides and maybe the coordinators can email it to those who have attended, those who want to do. But also, as I told you, details of this would also be shared on 14th of October, which is a Monday, between 1 and 1:45 by Farouk Latif, who is working for Chorus, and Duncan Maina, who has just recently moved to AECOM, both from University of Auckland. Some of these details would be discussed there. For this one, me and Gary McDonald would be there to kind of talk about brainstorming around this aspect. So that's pretty much from my end. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks Nirmal. Open it up now for people that have any questions. Maybe I can start with one, Nirmal, while other people are quickly formulating their questions. So you mentioned obviously this the change from grid 1.0 to 2.0 and how that's going to change the physical topology of the network, as well as some of the consequences that happen downstream. Can you give us some insights into that transition? Obviously won't happen overnight, and so there'll be challenges that the economics of existing Grid 1.0 assets will be declining as we try and ramp up the deployment of Grid 2.0. So there'll be situations where fossil fuel powered plants, energy generation assets, people are trying to essentially remove them from the network and therefore not investing in them. And there's obviously therefore an opportunity that they become critical weaknesses from a resilience perspective. So do you see, there are obvious challenges there. What do you see as things that people are either doing or need to start doing to make sure that those degrading assets don't become obvious Achilles heels in the network performance?
Right. So two ways I will answer this question. I'll come first from the generation side. So from the generation side, there's going to be massive changes and most of the job losses, which I mentioned, is going to be from the generation side. We are really talking about fossil fuel plants and things like that. And just for instance, from the New Zealand context, Taranaki has to totally change its shape of what its profile is going to be in the future. That's just one example of from the energy side. So from whatever I mentioned, the job losses are going to be in that sector. So it's primarily from that side. But if you put a seismic, the resilience lens onto it, I'm pretty much optimistic about it because we can operate. I did show you a slide where the Australian network before that storm was operating 50% with wind farms, right? And there are case studies in Ireland and things like that, where there at some situations you're operating at about 90% of wind farms. So that's not a problem. The problem is when those disaster does come through, right? Those strike through comes through, how do you manage it gracefully and how do you get out and how do you go back again? And so this is going to be a journey for us. So we have done it in the last 125 years to come to Grid 1.0. So we will be slowly transitioning to it. So I'm a little bit hopeful associated with that. And coming back to your question on economics, I think we will have to keep that particular, the economics of renewables is totally different. So we will have to reinvent new economics. And that's my sense at this stage.
Great, thanks. Questions from others? Okay, everyone's a bit shy, but just a reminder then, as Nirmal mentioned in his last few slides, maybe you can go back a couple, yeah, perfect, that there is an opportunity to engage in how some of these advances in the electrical infrastructure are being thought at from an earthquake and other natural hazards perspective. So encourage all of you to either attend these directly or let colleagues of yours know that they're happening and that they can attend. And just thanks again, Nirmal, on behalf of everyone for the presentation, and that, as we've done with all of the previous QuakeCoRE seminars, this will be available on the YouTube channel so that you will be able to view it subsequently. So thanks very much again, and enjoy the rest of the day.